Leeza Mangaldas in conversation with Latha Menon, and the topic being the joy of sex.
Yeah, hi, I'm Latha Menon. This is Leeza, and welcome friends to our conversation on the joy of sex. Before we begin, I'd just like to talk about, do you know what joy really is? I mean, it's supposedly happiness, fun, creativity. Sounds easy, doesn't it? But let's be honest. We all have some vague idea that joy exists, but do we really know how it actually works? Sex is kind of like the same. We all think we know it, but a lot of us are clueless. Joy and sex have a lot in common. The one thing is, for starters, they suffer from society's endless micromanagement. Everybody wants to control them, they want to label them, and no wonder so many people feel that they're running out of life's energy. And the problem with joy, we've got it all backwards. We turn fun things like sports into serious competitions, and serious things like sex into casual pastimes, just for kicks, like they say. One can't own joy or control it, one has to let go, to let joy take possession of one's being. And that's what, and what is more important is, we've also been handed out shame, fear, guilt, handed down from our ancestors like a bad family heirloom. And then there's this wonderful sex book. It's a gem. Author Leeza spills it all. Awkward DM questions, ethical dilemmas, and of course the elusive G-spot. She handles sexual conversations with panache. Gone are the days when we used to be whispering across medical pharmacies. Today, thanks to sex educators and influencers like Leeza, we can order pleasure products, like we can order a midnight snack. And not to say the social media content is now giving sex the PR makeover that it desperately needs. The piece de resistance, the book reminds us that there's no right way to be human, there's no ideal body, and there's no correct way to have sex. It tells us that it's like a friendly slap on your back, and it says, relax, you're doing fine. Vanakkam Leeza to Chennai. She studied at the Koda International School, so I'm going to speak a bit of Tamil with her.
Ramba Nandri.
And before we begin this conversation, I'd like Leeza to read an excerpt from her book.
I'm going to have to take my book from you. Sorry, I left. Oh, no, it's in my bag as well. But before I do, actually, I know we had like back-to-back sessions. I just want to say hi. I'm so glad you're all here. And I think that I still find it quite rare in India to have the opportunity to speak publicly about sex like this, all of us together talking about sex. I think this is special in a society where we are told we must be ashamed of even saying this word. So I just think, since we have the opportunity, shall we? If you like sex, I like sex, and it's quite a transgressive thing as a young unmarried woman to say that, say these three words, I like sex. So if you like sex, will you join me in saying, I like sex? If you don't like sex, you don't have to say it. But if you do, let's do this, okay? 1, 2, 3. I like sex. Woo, thank you. Should we do it again? For anyone who wasn't yet feeling sufficiently comfortable the first time. Let's stand up, okay. I like sex. Thank you, okay. All right.
Do you want to read that, please?
I will. You know, I think it's so sad, isn't it, that this thing that stands to be such a joyful aspect of life, it's the reason we all are alive, right? We're all products of this thing. And yet we can't talk about it. We can't admit to being interested in it. We shouldn't even know too much about it, let alone publicly admit to liking it, right? And I really think we need to change that. And so,
So I would like to tell you the experience I've been having for the past 1 week, ever since I agreed to be in conversation with Leeza. Everyone said, oh, you're going to talk about sex? I mean, I was just thinking, what is Leeza going through? She's written the book on sex. I'm just having one conversation, but I have been constantly reminded, oh, you're talking about sex?
I know, and I feel like talking about it is just the least important aspect of everything, actually. I think what's much more important is that everyone thinks about and talks about it in their own lives as well, not just us on this stage. You know, I really hope this will be a catalyst for everybody to feel a little bit freer to talk about and think about this more in their own lives. But I too started off clueless and ashamed, and just the way most of us are conditioned to feel about the subject. And so before we proceed with more questions, I'm going to read the first few pages of my book, which actually I sort of look back on my own first sexual experience, and instead of telling you too much more, I'm just going to read it to you. So, I had my first sexual experience in the winter of my freshman year in college. I was dating a really sweet guy, my first real boyfriend. A few months into the relationship, we decided we were ready to do it. We wanted it to be special, so we made a reservation at a nice restaurant for dinner that weekend, and the plan was to then come back to my dorm room, light candles, play soft music, get naked, and see where things go. We bought condoms, fresh strawberries, and a can of whipped cream, all in anticipation of our upcoming adventure. Dinner was entirely lovely and romantic, and back at my dorm room, after we'd been kissing and cuddling for a while, I decided it was time to get up close and personal with his penis. So I sidled halfway down the bed and began undoing his pants. But when I found my actual face a few inches away from an actual penis and scrotum, I was woefully ill-equipped to make sense of what I saw. Coming into that experience, I knew so little about what real genitals looked like. Mine is probably the last generation to have grown up without smartphones. I had never watched porn. This was the first time I was seeing an actual penis, and I was expecting to see 2 testicles, but I could only see 1. I'd only ever seen drawings of penises, like the sort people would make on the chalkboard when the teacher wasn't looking. 2 circles and 1 long oval. Even the diagrams in the chapter on the reproductive system in bio class, and I was a total nerd and could label them perfectly, they didn't prepare me for what real balls actually looked like. I was expecting that there'd be 2 separate spheres under his penis, not 2 spheres in one bag that can almost seem like one large blobby sphere. I tried my best to keep a straight face, but my head was a muddle of confusion and curiosity. Younger me was much less aware of genital diversity, and even less so of the notion that even if he did have only 1 ball, it's not such a big deal. Not wanting to embarrass him or myself, I closed my eyes and placed my hands on his penis, and as I felt around, it dawned on me. Oh, he does have 2 balls. They're just both packed into one sack. Oh, and that's how 18-year-old me learned about the scrotum. And so I empathize with the thousands of young people that write into me each day with questions like this, wondering if their bodies are normal, wondering if their relationships are normal. There's this massive fear that each of us is somehow not normal because nobody talks about this stuff. And so you think you're so alone in your confusion when actually it's so universal.
Yeah, so let us begin our conversation. I continue on that same vein. Why do you think people avoid taking a good long look at their own bodies, especially the intimate parts? And through interactions with your followers, what is your reading of why it is such a taboo to find joy in your body? And does size really matter?
That is a lot of questions. I think that we inherit shame around the body and the naked body from such a young age, right? Like, even when infants are taught the names of the body parts, parents, to this day, might say to a child, like, these are your eyes, this is your ear, your nose. And as they get lower down, they'll say, that's shame, shame. You know, this is still a euphemism used to name the genital region. And even in other contexts, in medical contexts, for example, the genital region, particularly female genitalia, but also the nerves in the region and things are often called, it's the pudenda, the pudendal nerves, the pudendum. And this comes from the Latin word for shame. So unfortunately, shame has been sort of cast upon sex and the body, you know, sort of inbuilt into the Western frameworks that most of us inherited via colonialism. In Christianity, shame is sort of linked with sex, the original sin, the Virgin Mary, all of these ideas. And I don't at all mean to criticize one religion over the other. I'm just sort of trying to get to the fact that there is a history behind where our ideas come from, right? And in India, we still have a lot of colonial ideas that we now think of as our culture, as if sex is the Western import, when actually shame was the Western import. Shame is the Western import, right? And yet in our laws and in our society, we still have this idea somehow that that no one in India has sex. Like we're just multiplying magically, and only Western societies have sex, which is clearly not true. But it's interesting to just think of that, the inheritance of shame.
Yeah, and you've written in your book that genitalia are as diverse as our faces. So, do you want to comment on the size?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh yes, size. Genitalia are indeed as diverse as our faces, and I think in a pre-internet era, most people did not see very many genitals other than their own. Today we live in the internet era where you can watch porn and see more genitals than your ancestors would have seen across multiple lifetimes. So that is an interesting, it is an interesting time to be alive. However, I think that most of us still don't really acknowledge the fact that, there's so many different types of bodies and they're all absolutely normal. We still tend to hold ourselves to a very punitive and narrow ideal, where, for women, I think that ideal is even more acute. You have to have big breasts, small waist, big butt, thin legs, big eyes, small nose, it's an impossible ideal, right? And so much so that even a supermodel probably has body image issues. Like, I haven't yet to meet anybody who thinks that they're sufficiently conform. It is just such a punitive ideal. And I think to some extent, with the male beauty standards, I mean, there's this idea of masculinity and penis size, and so many men seem to be, at least if my DMs are anything to go by, there tends to be a huge amount of body insecurity around size, and am I big enough? Am I hot enough? Do I last long enough? I think there's a lot of anxiety around performance and size, and I want to just leave you with an interesting thought, gentlemen, should you have this concern. Statistically, straight women are the least likely, as compared to gay men, lesbian women, straight men, of course. Straight women are the least likely to be able to report in a survey that they frequently or always experience orgasm during sex, okay? This is called the orgasm gap, right? Mm-hmm. Most straight men report that they frequently or always orgasm during sex. A significantly smaller percentage of straight women can say the same, and this is a pretty global finding. Now, lesbians, on the other hand, report having more frequent orgasms than straight women. There is no penis present typically, right? So if your concern around size has to do with your ability to please a female partner, I think it is worth noting that in fact, not just the size of a penis, the presence of a penis isn't even necessarily required to please a woman. So, and there's so much you can do with your hands and your mouth and your mind. I mean, the largest sexual organ is the brain. We don't acknowledge that enough. We don't think about It's not just about what's going on down here, it's also about what's going on up here. And so I think knowledge and skill and care and a desire to learn about your partner's pleasure and a willingness to center their pleasure is far more valuable if you're trying to please a woman than the size or shape of any body part. And in fact, I would say that for all people, like, I mean, I have very small breasts. All through my teenage years, I thought that that was something to be, to wish that they were different, or that I would conform more closely to a beauty ideal if they were bigger. But I don't think that I've ever had less fun in a sexual experience because they were small, or it really doesn't matter at all. And I think when you can recognize that you are just fine the way you are, and there's so much joy to be had by the body that you have, the way it is, and that you get to partake in and provide and experience pleasure regardless. I think that's such an empowering realization, and that confidence also makes you such a wonderful lover. It's really incidental how you look, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's very reassuring to hear. Now coming to women, Leeza, most women, they neglect that fundamental aspect of their personality, that one basic need. Like we just shouted out loud, I like sex. I enjoy being a sexual being, but yet they publicly pretend to mask it. And how do you think women can ditch the shame and all these societal rules about their sexuality and just embrace their sexual autonomy? Like most of the men are doing it, so why not the women?
I mean, I think, unfortunately, women are policed and surveilled so much. They get this sort of conditioning from such a young age that sex is something that they must tolerate only, that you can't, that it's not really something you're meant to actively participate in or enjoy. It's something that happens to you. Your sexuality is something that your family's honor is tied to until you're married, and then you are the property of your husband, right? We live in a society where premarital sex is frowned upon, but marital rape is legal. The law itself seems to suggest that women's agency doesn't really matter. You can't have it when you want it, but you can't say no if you're married and your husband wants it. So I think the odds are really, and patriarchy globally has had these types of norms, right? It's not unique to India. This is the system of the world, and a world that's so invested in endogamy, where you're trying to ensure that societies reproduce only within existing social hierarchies of caste and religion and class and all of these things, meant, women's bodies were seen as these vehicles of reproduction, and so we must control and surveil the wombs. That's basically, unfortunately, still to a large extent, how ideas around women's sexuality are maintained within a society, right? What kind of a woman has sex before marriage? What kind of a woman has multiple partners? What kind of a woman is, open about her sexual knowledge or desire? Or, like, to this day in 2025, there's still a huge judgment, right, on a woman who's sexually confident or in any way sexually expressive outside of the confines of a same religion, same caste, opposite sex marriage. And so, I mean, can we even blame women, right, if they're afraid of being open about the fact that they might want to have sexual pleasure, or that their desires do not conform to this framework? Unfortunately, we do inherit this idea that sex is a site of duty and pain and shame for women, rather than a site of joy and expression and freedom and pleasure. And I hope that together we're invested in changing that. I really hope we are. I like sex. Yes.
Now, coming to women of all age groups, I'm not just talking about the older or the middle, but also the younger generation, which is like, I would say, who are about 17 or 18, just initiating themselves into sex. And what happens? They have this pressure in relationships where they're still trying to figure out their own boundaries, and yet they're in love, and they want to please the man, but they really don't know how much they should move forward to please the person. Like how much they should set their boundary. They said, wait, how much am I supposed to do to keep them happy? Could you share with us ways that, you can treat the relationship like respect with boundaries, but yet make it a kind of a thing where both people can be happy in the relationship, but they're young and navigating it?
I think that, unfortunately, most of us, and especially when we're very young and just beginning to explore our sexuality, we have these very sort of rigid ideas of gender roles within a sexual encounter, right? And we tend to inherit a very heteronormative and rigidly binary framework for gender and sexuality. And it takes quite a lot of deliberate thinking and unlearning to sort of experience something and imagine something beyond that. And so I think this idea of the man as the sort of the it's almost like the predator and the prey, right? The man, it's about conquest for men, and it's about sort of giving. I mean, why do women give their virginity? And he takes, like, what is this exchange? It's not a transaction, right? It should be an equal and enjoyable sort of shared experience, rather than something being given or taken, or where the stakes are so much higher for one person than the other based on how that whole attitude to gender is configured in society. And so I think that young people today, and I see this and I'm happy to see it, are questioning the relevance of this sort of gender double standard and this very binary attitude to gender. And I think just as women are ashamed for being sexual, or would be judged harshly around wanting to have sex, etc., there's the opposite for men, where if a man is not yet ready for sex or doesn't want to do something or hasn't had very much experience, there's a sense of shame around that, right? There's a sense of shame around men being inexperienced, and there's a shame around women being experienced. It's ridiculous when you think of, I mean, most of the ideas we've inherited about gender, sexuality, sexual orientation, and the body are completely ridiculous. Like, we would do ourselves a favor by just like throwing it all away and starting afresh, because so much of what we've been conditioned to believe is just so limiting. It's like we've willingly, or actually not so willingly, before we could make decisions for ourselves, ideas have been planted in our heads to then become a sort of prison within which we continue to operate in, even though it really doesn't serve us.
And this conversations about sex with our younger children, a lot of parents here, this is something you've really written in your book, about how one has to start conversations about sex early in the house, in the family. And I had this episode where I hadn't discussed it with my older daughter, and this was some years ago, and my younger child, who was in grade 6, one day she rushes from school and she comes and says, "What is sex?" And I'm like reading the newspaper and I'm like surprised, and I just didn't have an answer to say immediately. And my older one just gives me a knowing look, whisks my younger one away, and after half an hour, the younger child comes to me and says, with an all-knowing expression, she looks at me, says, "So you're not having any more babies, so no more sex, right?" So this is what she understood. Babies equal sex. So, these kind of conversations are not once in a time. It is something that one has to do naturally across time, right? That's what you would recommend?
Absolutely. I think, and look, I understand it's hard for parents, right? Because we, unfortunately, haven't really inherited many templates. For most people who are parents, their parents never spoke to them about it, so they don't know how to talk to their kids about it, and the schools don't really do much either. And so people are typically, even if they would have liked to do something, they don't have the tools. But really, I think that talking to within families about sex has to be an ongoing conversation, not a one-time conversation. It's not that one time that many people never have the conversation, but some parents think that on their child's 18th birthday or something, they might have a cursory discussion about condoms or something like that. But really, you need to be talking to your kids, like from infancy. I mean, we just talked about naming the body parts. Please don't tell them their genitals are called shame, right? And then at any opportunity, because there will be, children are curious, they have questions, they will ideally have no better person to turn to than their parents, right? But when you tell your children falsehoods or make stuff up that's like scientifically inaccurate because you're uncomfortable with providing that answer, then you're really, unfortunately, making the child's sense of discernment is going to be impacted by that. If they have an unreliable source of information in their most powerful authority figure, it becomes very difficult to tell fact from fiction, right? If your own parent is a source of misinformation. So I really encourage parents not to. You can find age-appropriate ways to provide scientifically accurate and judgment-free information to your children. Do not make stuff up and do not provide a shame-laden answer. It really has long-term ramifications. And I think that when thinking about, you said reproduction, this idea that sex equals reproduction, that still tends to be the only way we're educated about it. If we ever learn about sex, it's the reproductive system. But there's so much more to sex than just reproduction, and sexuality is such a big part of identity, right? And I think that if people have children, they've got to be loving towards love cannot be conditional. It cannot be based on who your child wants to have a relationship with and whether that person is only opposite sex or not, and whether, I think the conditionality of parental love based on child sexual orientation or gender identity and things like that is also something we really need to think about more. Because parents, like, what an amazing role you play in the world, right? Parenting has to be one of the most powerful ways. I think if everyone were good parents, the world would have no problems.
A good advice would be when the children learn about the reproductive system of frogs, is a good time to talk about sex with children, I think. Now, thanks to social media influencers and sex educators like you, the rise of sex positivity is empowering women to take control of their sexual experiences, to explore their pleasures on their own terms. Taking from your book, this is something from her book, it's an excerpt. It says, she shared her friend's experience. It says, sex with a guy who has no idea how your body works, when you have a vibrator at home, is quite literally like choosing to take the bus when you own a Ferrari. This is something that Leeza's written. Her friends had that experience. And which other communities has it empowered? And like you mentioned, how do you bring about more LGBTQ awareness and sensitivity?
I think, so I have lots to say. What Latha read was me recalling when I hadn't used a vibrator yet. I was like 24, 25 in that story, and my bisexual friend was telling me, like, you've got to get a vibrator. What are you doing? She'd been dating women and then started dating men, and then was reminded of why she preferred dating women. But anyway, long story short, I think with regard to women's pleasure, we're made to believe that it's too much to ask for, that our bodies are complicated and difficult, that orgasms are elusive. Most of us have faked orgasms or spent decades faking orgasms. Some people go through, their whole lifetime faking orgasm. And so I think that the idea that women are entitled to pleasure, that their pleasure is in fact not so mysterious or elusive, and that masturbation can be a gateway into sexual self-knowledge, particularly for women, because many women don't masturbate or think they shouldn't, or whereas for men it tends to be something men will end up doing anyway. I think some of what I wrote there was about my own arriving late at this orgasm party myself, having had my first orgasm late in life, and really finding that vibrators were life-altering. But the other thing that you talked about with regard to sort of thinking about sexuality as a spectrum, and when people say raising awareness about LGBTQ issues or something like that, I feel like there's a very us versus them, unfortunately, language around it, as if like the people doing the raising of the awareness themselves are not. It's like I think we would do ourselves a service by removing that separation. It's not like we are some people and that LGBTQ is there, okay? LGBTQ is here. Everyone, like this idea of somehow like these normal people over here and those strange people over there who we're suddenly being kind to, like that is bullshit, okay? Because our own heteronormativity and attachment to the binary is something that was fed to us. I think in a freer world we might, hot take, but I think it's quite accurate, I think we'd all be queer. We'd all be non-binary, you know, like who said, why is it that just because I'm a woman I have to sit a certain way and speak a certain way and go to a certain school and do a certain job? And do you know what I mean? When you start to break it down, all the ideas we have about our own selfhood that come from patriarchy and colonialism and all of this, they start to break down really quickly. So I just want to say, like, sexuality in general is probably a lot more fluid than we've been allowed to think it is. And so when we think of LGBTQ, instead of thinking of it as some issue there affecting those people, I want you to think of it as an issue that is affecting every single one of us. It would be a freer, more expansive and wonderful world for every single person if we stopped thinking of sexuality, gender, and all of these things as these cages with rules that everyone must follow, and these people who don't follow these rules like deserve just these little bits of rights because now it's not politically correct to deny them those rights, you know? So anyway, thank you.
Like, to have joy in sex, one has to have space. And space is a total privilege, isn't it? Now, you know, in engineering colleges in Madras and anywhere else, if there are trees, couples go under it and the trees are cut down. In Bombay, you know, the space is so less. There are, you know, people hurl abuses at people behind those sea rocks. So what happened? And even families, they all share a room. They really have just one room. So, I mean, how are you supposed to enjoy sex when you're sharing a room with your family? What do you think of the space dilemma, and how does one find joy in something like this? I know it's a challenging question.
Yeah, it is true that privacy is a scarce commodity in
our country especially.
In our country especially. And I think so many people have to turn to the anonymity of public space for privacy. You know, you hope that on the promenade or in a park or somehow, because there's so many people, you and your lover can steal a moment without being noticed. So it's ironic that sometimes people have to turn to the most crowded places to get lost in the crowd and steal a kiss or hold hands or whatever they can manage.
And find joy in that.
Because they don't have privacy. But love is so resilient and it finds its way. I don't think even a lack of space can actually prevent people from experiencing love and desire.
Yeah. How can we shape our relationship with internet porn to ensure that if we watch it, it influences healthier, more positive experiences instead of gender unequal and violent ones?
You know, I think that today young people must be equipped with media literacy skills. So I think parents in schools, and we need to be thinking about this because there's so much media on the internet, and porn is like absolutely central to the architecture of the internet. It's one of the largest, how should I say, like the amount of data on the internet that is porn is massive. So today, if a young person has an internet connection and a device, they are going to stumble upon porn, whether intentionally or unintentionally, or you know, because a third party shows it to them. Like it is going to happen. So you are living in denial if you think your child has internet access and a device and is not going to stumble upon porn. They are going to stumble upon porn, and that's okay. But it would help if you had a conversation with the if we were talking to young people about this, because unfortunately, if you're without any context, if your first visual reference point for sex is porn, it can be a little bit destabilizing or confusing or even disturbing. I mean, mainstream internet porn can be quite violent, often misogynistic. There's often also not enough clarity around consent, like was this act consensual? Is the act consensually disseminated? All of that stuff can be quite confusing to a young person, right? And so I think we must talk to young people about porn, and for people who do enjoy watching porn or learn, in the absence of sex education, porn has been a stand-in for many, many, many people as the place where they learn about sex. And it can in some ways be affirming, perhaps for some people whose desires were stigmatized in their own community. Porn can even be a place where maybe they felt like, okay, I'm not the only person in the world who has this desire. I'm not, it can be affirming, or even, it can play a positive role in some people's lives. I think that it's very hard to say absolutely about anything in life that something is all bad or all good. I mean, even a kitchen knife can be used to cook food, or you can kill someone with it, right? So I think even when thinking about porn, I don't think banning porn, or you don't throw away the baby with the bathwater, right? You try and equip people to make mindful choices in the ways that they consume something. And there are pornographers today that are making porn that is ethical. I know that can sound like an oxymoron, but there's a greater emphasis on consent, a greater, sort of much better working conditions and rights for the people that are part of the whole production, and also emphasis on things like condom usage, more diverse relationships, and it's trying, right, to mitigate some of the problems with mainstream porn. So it's good to know that that's out there. It's good to talk to young people about this stuff, and I think people should, if you were to learn how to drive by watching The Fast and the Furious, that wouldn't be a good idea. And I think it's good for you to tell your kids that porn is entertainment, not education, and but why don't we talk about this at home instead of them having to run off and look for this information without your help?
So we've almost come to the end of our session, but I'd like Leeza to read. She loves the origin of certain words and the etymology of it. So a word that we use rather often, which is orgasm, I'd like her to explain the origin of the word as well as the meaning of it, not just in English, but in French, in Hindi, in multiple languages perhaps.
I have a little section, I know I talk a lot. We're wrapping up. Are we getting to the end of the? Okay. Yeah. Okay, I will read you this little paragraph about the etymological origins of the word orgasm. So, while the word orgasm derives etymologically from the Greek word orgasmos, which means swelling and excitement, in a paper titled, "Behold, I Am Coming Soon, a study on the conceptualization of sexual orgasm in 27 languages," researchers Anita Chang and Wenyu Chang note that orgasm across cultures has been conceptualized in a variety of related but subtly different ways. As a physiological response, a psychological state, and as an ideal goal. From Farsi to Finnish, from Bengali to Tagalog, they list the key metaphors around how orgasm has been conceptualized linguistically. Orgasm as a peak or summit, orgasm as fire, orgasm as arriving at a destination, orgasm as an end or a departure, orgasm as a release of force or substance, and orgasm as a feeling of intense satisfaction. Indeed, even in Hindi, the phrase charam sukh prapti suggests a sort of apex of sexual pleasure and satisfaction. If you've had an orgasm, you can probably relate to these framings of the body tingling with fiery pleasure, bringing forth a physical and often even emotional catharsis. The French phrase for orgasm, la petite mort, means the little death. A fascinating phrase, it points to the long-standing philosophical associations of the erotic with the tragic, and of sex as something both worldly, bodily, base, as well as otherworldly, exquisite, and transcendental.
And that's orgasm.
May we have more!
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we're ready for questions.
Could you start with the senior citizen, if you don't mind?
The senior citizens. Yeah, you want to start the questions?
All right. I'm ready. Please let me know.
I can't.
Yeah. Can I shoot?
Yeah.
The question.
Yeah.
I am 70 now, only 70. I got married at 32. Nobody had to tell me what to do. Only the present generation, the youngsters, need a book or a conversation. So I am all frank like you. It's no more than a biological need. My parents had 6 children. His parents had a baker's dozen. Those days, having children was not a taboo, but please don't talk. Even the elders, when you fall at the feet, they welcome Padinarum Petru Perum Varga. Certain things need not be told, madam. I'm not having a question at your sessions or the books. Sky is the limit. I was once watching a midnight serial. At the days, I could only watch. I was just watching a midnight masala at 12 bang in the night. My first daughter was around 7. She just came for the washroom. She saw what was happening. No questions were exchanged. No eyebrows were raised. She saw for 30 seconds and walked back. That's all. All is peace at home now.
What is your question though?
My
You're saying you
question-
don't want to have conversations on
No.
sex.
In maybe the present, no, my question is, sorry,
Yeah, your question.
I'm a little late for the question.
Yeah.
Only the present generation that they need to know what is sex, what is book. It is no more than a biological need. My parents had 6. His parents had a baker's dozen. I mean, certain things you don't talk. You have it, no problem. You don't have to look at the body at the night when everything is dark.
What made you attend today's session if that's what you believe? How come you decided to spend 1 hour listening to a talk about sex if you think it doesn't need to be spoken about?
No. I never said I fully enjoyed the conversation.
And why did you enjoy it if it's something we don't have to talk about and it's only
No,
biological?
I never
Is
said-
it not also psychological? And sir, do you think your grandfather knew where the clitoris is?
Of course he knew. There was no light. He never had to know. Certain things you feel, ma'am. You don't have to look.
But did he know if his wife had an orgasm?
Obviously
think-
they had it. They don't spell it out, ma'am. Like the younger generation spell it out. We don't spell it out. Why you have to spell it out when both the parties are
But
enjoying?
why does it make you so upset that people...
I'm not upset. I'm happy. I wish the present generation knows more. They need not have to look. Why look at the book? Do you really need to? Do I really need to read a book to know how to perform?
But maybe others need, sir. Thank
No,
you. Thank you for your question.
I'm happy.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for coming today. Honestly, thank you for coming.
I really
Thank
enjoyed. Please don't get.
No,
No, I'm glad you came, and I hope you'll think more about why you
Thank
have
you.
that
thought.
opinion. I see. Why don't we have a young woman ask a question? I think
It's not working.
that is my favorite demographic.
Hello,
Oh.
can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. You said premarital sex is frowned upon. What I feel is sex at any point of time other than after marriage or for having babies is being frowned upon till date. And also PDA is being frowned upon. Even in our families, your parents don't do it before us because they feel it is like shame or something. So what I feel is like they are telling, when I asked why it is being so, the reasons they are telling is the culture, tradition, discipline, way of living. We are digressing from that. We are following the tradition of one man, one woman. So you're telling your sexual desires your choices you should have the choice of making your sexual life. But the sexual life in a common Indian household is controlled by the family. It's not controlled by the individual. So what do you think? Are we not digressing from that tradition? First question. Second question is, we had an earlier session where they told sexual trafficking, the main reason for sexual trafficking is pornography. So what do you think about that?
I think that unfortunately, with regard to sex trafficking, I think when people talk about the topic, unfortunately, sex work and sex trafficking are often conflated because for some people it seems unthinkable that there is a difference, that there are some people who might, with consent and knowledge and their own agency, be partaking in certain work where they have rights. And I mean, look at OnlyFans. It is a $1 billion industry right now, right? And there's no middlemen. There's people making money from the privacy of their home without ever actually having to meet a client, without having a pimp or anything like that. And there's people who've like gone to Ivy League universities who are now on OnlyFans. You can read about this. Now, whether you and I like it or not, we're not here to be the moral police, right? Sex work is work, and people should be able to engage in any work with dignity, with rights, with fair pay and all of that. And on the other hand, sex trafficking is, I mean, in human rights violation that people need to be protected from. So it's not a either or thing. Sex work is work, and sex trafficking should be police and abolished, right? So I think that unfortunately, we don't know enough about these issues. We'll come to one talk, and also we have our own moral panic about things, and we tend to conflate issues. We do not think deeply about things, and we mix things up. So sex work and sex trafficking are two very different things, and I think that unfortunately with pornography, it can be difficult for the viewer to discern, as I was saying earlier, about consent, right? So we've got to be mindful about what we consume and be willing to pay for it as well. When you're paying for media, typically the people in that media also made some money. Whereas when you're just looking for the quickest free clip that you can find, who knows, it could be revenge porn, it could be someone's clip that was never intended for public consumption. Where we tend to not be very mindful in how we consume privately, and very moralistic when sharing an opinion publicly. So I encourage everybody to be very mindful in their personal and private consumption of media and in their interactions and things as well. With regards to the sort of media you consume. The other question about family structure, I wasn't sure what the question is, but I hope that, I wasn't sure whether the question was that, am I suggesting that we...
Digressing from tradition.
Yeah, digressing from the tradition, culture.
Tradition,
Like
a person like
culture
her.
is like one man for one woman, but now you're saying our sexual life should be controlled by us. So my mind will tell 1,000 things to do today. Shall I go ahead and do and live my life according to my wishes, or should I be controlled by the culture, family?
I think that, well, look, you don't have to listen to me, but I think that we all do, and I mean, what is freedom, right? If you're going to live your whole life by the rules and obligations and expectations of all of these other structures, who are you? Do you even get to know in this life? Who are you? What do you want? What do you desire?
I know, but what
right?
I think is we have civilized and we have come forward. We are not early man to be like an animal, right? We have civilized, we have fought so much for our costume, everything. So this freedom, is it not going backward?
I believe it is not going backward
I don't know, I'm still confused, that's why I'm asking.
No.
Okay, I think we'll take this question and answer it outside. It's a longer conversation, we'll do it later.
Don't have answer.
No, I do have answers actually. We can take it right now, and unfortunately other people won't be able to answer
We don't
questions.
have time. Yeah,
no, I do have an answer. I think that we can be the change, right? How have we gotten here? How have we gotten here today? Lots of people have had to fight fights to make it even possible for a young unmarried woman like me to sit at a stage in Chennai at the Hindu Lit Fest and have this conversation, okay? Because my feminist ancestors, all the people, and particularly women and queer people who have fought certain fights to get to a point where I can sit here and have this conversation, even though there's some triggered people in the audience who can barely handle it, it has taken a lot of fighting to get here, okay? And we can be the change so that your children don't have to sit and be like, is it okay if I love someone who I want to love and wear what I want to wear and eat what I want to eat and marry who I want to marry? One day our children will hopefully not feel that dissonance between what my parents are telling me to do and what my heart desires. Because no one should feel that dissonance. The hallmark of humanity is free will, is agency, and we make ethical choices. We have that is what separates human beings from animals. We are not animals because we have free will, agency, the ability to make ethical choices. When families, societies, and social structures oppress you to the extent that you have no choice, that is, in my opinion, closer to being like an animal. So I have answers. I have a lot of answers. I don't know if you guys can handle my answers. But for one last time tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I like sex. If you like sex, join me. I like sex. Good night.